is the way to someone excels at decision making?
To my mind, the very best decision makers are people who are insanely self-aware. They know what they're good at. They know what their biases and prejudices are. They test these things against themselves all the time. And when it comes to a complex decision-making process, they're perfectly aware of the fact that this is a complex process. They don't make knee-jerk decisions. They don't make decisions on the fly. They don't trust their gut. So, yeah, decision-making is this wonderful, wonderful tapestry of different approaches, different ideas, different methodologies. But ultimately, the best decision makers are those who know that they are imperfect and should rely on the wisdom of others to get the best possible decision.
Bruce Whitfield, he's in South London right now. We're going to talk about, are we a sum of our decisions? But let's get into your origin story. Already, he has a very regal accent, I think. I think it's a wonderful accent. Of course, he's thinking, I don't have an accent, you have an accent. Let's get into it. Let's go back. Tell us, are you from South London? Where were you born? Tell us a little about your background and how you how's it segue into what you do now?
We've only got half an hour. I'll give you the potted version of it really, really quickly. I grew up on a farm in the South African version of Idaho, flat farmland, grassland, maize fields, cornfields, as you would call them, cattle and sheep. And my earliest memory was one of my earliest memories, my father performing artificial insemination on a cow. And in order to perform artificial insemination, it's breakfast time where you are, you have to insert arms and various instruments into the animal. And I was watching this as a 5-year-old and knowing that that was not going to be my career choice. But listening to the afternoon radio program in those days, reflecting on something I didn't understand, but it sounded magical, it sounded intriguing. It was too complicated for me as a 5-year-old to register, but it was something called Watergate, and there was something called Nixon, and he was in trouble, and there was a man on the radio who was telling these compelling stories, and I just went, that is the career for me. And I set off from the age of 5, knowing precisely what I wanted to do, went to university, studied journalism, got my first job in radio as a news reporter in South Africa's transition to democracy, rubbed shoulders with the likes of Nelson Mandela and others at a time of extraordinary political change. And yeah, worked in live radio, went to London, worked in live radio in London, back to South Africa, worked in management, went into financial journalism, did okay as a financial journalist, hosted a live daily radio show for 2 hours every day, interviewing really interesting people. Everyone from Alan Greenspan, you'll remember him, to Richard Branson, with whom you'll be familiar, Mohammed Al-Arian, still on the circuit as a respected economist, and many, many others, and built up a database of knowledge of dealing with extraordinary people, and realized in that 20-year process, and I ended the radio show in June this year, that what I loved most was to pick the brains of really interesting people as to the decisions that they'd taken, why they'd taken those decisions, when they'd taken those decisions, which were the best ones, which were the worst ones, and what we can extract from that and the lessons we can extrapolate from that, from really high-powered people in our own everyday lives. And the lessons that have emerged from the Art of Deciding podcast are wondrous and are building each and every single time we do a show.
Wow. So, it's interesting as you talk about decision making, and I guess that, if you could watch a cow getting inseminated, because usually when you do it to a dog, you can just done, by, surgically, not manually like that.
Well, it was the 1970s, Michael. Things. I don't think it's actually changed much, other than farmers now have a long plastic glove, which my father didn't have in those days. He did have a bucket of warm soapy water afterwards, but you know.
I would think that process would get you starting to think about decision making.
Exactly. My first big decision that I recall was, I'm not doing that.
Right. Let's eat the dessert a little before we get into the salad, because I like to do go on the origin of things, of your journey. But let's talk about you're talking to so many people about decisions. There's intellectual knowledge and there's physical knowledge. We can conceptualize, and I just told you what a strawberry tastes like, the pulp, the seeds, and everything else. But then working it into your nervous system of analyzing the data that you have to make a decision and then following through with those decisions. And there's, I think, paraphrasing 35,000, 38,000 decisions on the internet says that you go through a day. That's a staggering amount. I can't believe there's that many decisions.
And nor can I, and that's why I preface it with the internet says, yes. And as best as I can, and as Abraham Lincoln said, never believe everything you read on the internet. Now, I found it on the internet. It must be true. But it does make sense up to a point in that we speak on average, and you and I speak more than the average, 14, 15, 17, 18, 20,000 words a day. Each one of those words is at least subconsciously a decision as to how we present ourselves, what we choose to say, how we choose to respond. And I guess there is a calculation that can come close to that sort of number. Certainly we make thousands of decisions a day. Breathing in and out is not one of them. Our heartbeat is not one of them, but pretty much everything else is a decision.
I'm conscious of that. I'm shaking my head and nodding. Yes, that's a decision to nod. Everything.
Not that you are going, I must now nod my head and look engaged and enthused. Mm-hmm. No, you're not doing that.
It's a reflex. That would be a subconscious decision, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But so now to jump ahead, because I want to go back, but to jump ahead a little bit though, I'm dying to know, what is the way to someone excels at decision making, working into their nervous system and working that muscle, because you could talk to your 15-year-old daughter and say, make good decisions. You're so important. And here's how you analyze a decision and then follow through with the decision. But the art form of taking the data, we're talking important decisions, that. Everybody has a story. So my friend's like, crypto selling at $10. I'm like, that's ridiculous. I mean, maybe a digital currency should be $1, but not $10. So
not $100,000, yeah.
That's right. And especially after the roller coaster ride, but that decision making, and even now, the same decision. I was in the car with a friend and I said, $100,000. Still, I mean, Ethereum, I own Ethereum, but I'm not buying Bitcoin because it just seems like that bubble is going to pop, and it hasn't yet. And it's been like 14, 15, 16 years. These are decisions. Are we shaped by our decisions? I think we are.
So I'm sure your grandmother, my grandmother certainly told me every time I grabbed a bag of candy or bag of sweets, as we might call it, she said, you are what you eat. Be careful. Don't put that stuff into your body. And we are a sum total of the information we consume, what we allow in, what we allow to process, what we therefore believe as a result of the information that we consume. That develops our biases. It develops the way we think. It makes us who we are. And we bring all of that to each and every single decision that we make. And to my mind, the very best decision makers are people who are insanely self-aware. They know what they're good at. They know what their biases and prejudices are. They test these things against themselves all the time. And when it comes to a complex decision-making process, they're perfectly aware of the fact that this is a complex process. They don't make knee-jerk decisions. They don't make decisions on the fly. They don't trust their gut, as Liv Boeree, who lives not far away from you. She was born in Kent, just over there, down the road in England. But Liv Boeree became a world champion poker player and made millions of dollars playing poker. And she talks about people using intuition, being intellectually lazy. And I think we all revert at some point, because some of the stuff is so complicated, to saying, you know what, I actually can't compute the challenge that is before me. I'm going to trust my gut on this one and just go with that. And that is something that is intellectually lazy. We're not interrogating the facts. We're not looking to challenge our own beliefs and prejudices. And the best decision makers are those people who are able to do that and to also change their minds, people who are able to be convinced with new information. So Sir Brad Freed, who is a former chairman of the Bank of England, the central bank, the Federal Reserve of the United Kingdom, he talks about decision making being this insanely painful, agonizing, gut wrenching process because he understands the magnitude of decisions that have to be reached. And you have to listen to as many opposing viewpoints as possible and somehow distill that and funnel it down into a single decision or a series of decisions. And in doing that, you are able to come to the best possible conclusion. And the best conclusion you can come to is that absolutely no decision is perfect. All our decisions need to be reviewed all the time. They need to be challenged all the time. From the moment we make our decision, it's out of date because we made our decision based on what we know, and the world has already moved on and changed as we go ahead. So yeah, decision making is this wonderful, wonderful tapestry of different approaches, different ideas, different methodologies. But ultimately, the best decision makers are those who know that they are imperfect and should rely on the wisdom of others to get the best possible decision. And yeah, that's the way it works.
You know what that reminds me of? Just that part right there. There's a story of Norman Schwarzkopf. I think Tony Robbins told this story, and that there was maybe two generals, two colonels. I forget what. Came to him with a problem. I guess Robbins was in the room, and he said they both had this imbroglio to where they had to decide on something. They were working on it for like 8 months. Do you know this story?
No, I don't know the story. Carry on. I love your story.
So he said, this person's saying this, they vetted it out, and they were to spend 8 months on this issue. And he said, what do you want to do? It's either this one or this one. And Schwarzkopf said, choose that one. And then they walked out. And then he said, it seemed like you didn't even know which when you were choosing on. He goes, no, but they both worked on it for 8 months. And they were at that point where they couldn't decide either, and they were like, he's like, somebody just had to make a decision, to just move forward, because that was the best decision, because both of those probably had parity between those two scenarios. So I guess
yeah. And when you are particularly, and why people are so enamored by military scenarios is because this is life and death stuff. If you do A, X number of people are likely to die. If you do B, Y number of people are likely to die. Neither scenario is perfect. Which is the least worst situation, because we need to get from here to there to stop them shooting at us. And people are enticed by military decision-making, and perhaps a little bit too excited by military decision-making, especially when, I think leadership is changing, and I think the way boardrooms work is changing, and I think smart leaders are not necessarily top-down leaders in the same way as you might perceive the military to be in many cases. And I think, decision-making is this, and it's not a science, and that's why I've called the podcast The Art of Deciding, because there is artistry to it, and there is subtlety to it, and there's nuance to it. And
it seems like, decision making, and I guess, I don't know if you probably talk about this. They don't talk about it enough in schools, at least the schools that I hear, is like critical thinking, kind of like, and I talk about this ad nauseum, but Toyota's 5 whys. Why is that? Why is that? They are very familiar with the Toyota asks 5 whys on how to do something at least 5 times to get pay dirt on more of the clearer picture. And why not ask that with, who, what, where, why, when, and how, at least minimum 5 times to get a clearer picture, so I at least broke that down. So that gives me enough data, enough understanding of to make a better decision. It seems like sometimes these higher level decisions, financial, banking, military, you really need to, have a level of critical thinking, almost like sometimes a spreadsheet, to where you're sitting there breaking things down, to where then you have to have that Schwarzkopf moment where it's like, well, I have an understanding at this point. There's parity between certain scenarios. It's time to make that decision. Yeah.
And sometimes the best decision could be to make no decision. And this is that's a decision in itself, saying, all right, you two need to nut this out. There are parallels in what you're saying. There are disparities in what you're saying. You need now to work together to take the very best of your two scenarios, because we can't make a decision until you come up with the best combined solution. If you've ever sat in a meeting with somebody who likes the sound of their own voice and is a big believer in their own brilliance, they speak a lot in the meeting. And you study people like Bezos, for example. Bezos insists on speaking last. So he goes into a meeting, Jeff Bezos, and he's built an okay little business. I mean, not bad, delivers a couple of parcels about the world, but, houses, a big chunk of the world's data nowadays. And whether he practices or not, I don't know. But at least publicly, he talks about the fact that the moment you, as a leader within an organization, set out and dominate a conversation, you start getting people agreeing with you. And it's wonderful because people affirm your beliefs and they affirm your point of view. You're not learning anything new. You are not getting the best out of your team. You've employed all of these people who are sitting around the table going, yes, oh yeah, absolutely, boss. Yeah, I like your idea more than Jim Bob over here because I'd like the promotion, please. I'm sucking up at an uber level. And the power of silence in those scenarios where you as the leader can, this is the problem we need to solve. How best do we solve it? And you go around and you shut up. And you prod and you provoke and you challenge perhaps, but you only ask questions and you never make statements. And that takes more time. It takes an enormous amount of restraint for most people, and most people who've risen to a level in an organization are, by their very nature, strong, opinionated, smart, capable people. But you've got to ask yourself the question. I in one of the presentations that I do, I use the example of the world's leading communications technology circa 2007, the one that used our opposable thumbs to the greatest extent. And it was this enormous, enormous success story called BlackBerry. And everybody had a BlackBerry. Anybody who had a BlackBerry. It was aspirational. Even if you sent 3 emails a day, you wanted to send them on a BlackBerry because that's what the cool guys in New York did. And they dominated the market. At the same sort of time as that, I remember Forbes magazine having a cover, and it had the CEO of Nokia on the cover, and it said 2 billion cell phones. Can anyone catch the cell phone king? And that was in the same month as Steve Jobs stood up in Palo Alto and said, I've got this new thing called the iPhone. Steve Ballmer is on record as laughing about this stupid thing. It's got no keyboard. I mean, what kind of business person would want that? And what was happening within the discussions at BlackBerry, or RIM, I think it was called, the company that owned it, they were talking about it and going, well, yeah, it's fancy, it's nice, but our market share keeps growing. You got this new product that everyone's raving about, but our market share is growing. Our market share is growing, and it did for 2 years. And so what people were doing within BlackBerry, I assume, was reaffirming their beliefs, reaffirming their biases. Very smart, very capable people. But they convinced themselves that they were still winning because this new technology was really not going to have a huge impact. Everybody wanted a keyboard because that's what everybody was used to. But suddenly it changed. There was a tipping point. And suddenly they had that big outage. They lost credibility. They never recovered from it. Nokia didn't innovate fast enough. Suddenly Apple came out with this astonishing device. Samsung and Huawei and everyone else came along behind them at an extraordinarily rapid pace. People created their different operating systems and ecosystems. But the world changed in 2007, and it took about 2 years for the world to realize that it had changed. And it was a revolution. And these revolutions happen, and the smartest people miss them. People love to talk about the Kodak moment, inventing the digital camera, but putting it into a safe because we don't want to disrupt our own paper business. Yeah. And I'm working on a book at the moment of a massively innovative business that I've got to be careful what I say because I can't say it yet. But they disrupt themselves all the time. They are, the code they use to run their business today, 2% of it is what they were using 5 years ago. They are constantly refreshing, constantly innovating, constantly changing, constantly looking at business segments of their business and going, if we launch this new business, it'll cannibalize this bit, but we're willing to sacrifice that bit because this bit is better. And they're constantly doing it. They're constantly challenging it. And they I don't think they're very nice to each other either. It's not personal, you understand, but they go for the ideas and they bat hard for their ideas. And unless you're doing that and you are openly challenging not only yourself, but your colleagues and your teams, clients, your service providers, everybody, you're not making quality decisions. And it comes down to the point you make about critical thinking. And it's this constant notion of not second guessing, because that doesn't help, but constantly challenging your ideas, challenging your approaches, challenging the way you do things, and constantly trying to be better.
In origin, what would you say is the algorithm for, because you've interviewed so many people about this one subject, what has been that typical journey of step one, step through 15 of making good decisions? What's the commonalities of these, of people that have had success, and what's their processes?
I'm going to go a bit more generic than that, if I may. Well, I am, so I am. I've been studying over a period of 21 years on the radio, 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, 240 days a year, probably. I skipped a couple of weekends, took some holidays. I did about 50,000 interviews.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, many of them repeats, of course, in a 6-month
John Lee Dumas. He looks, you know who he is? John Lee Dumas?
No, I don't.
He does a podcast called Entrepreneurs on Fire. And
okay,
he does it 7 days a week. But I mean, that 50,000, that is like, he ain't touching you yet.
Not every single one of them was a perler. Maybe 100 of them were really good. 500 were interesting. 1,000 may have been useful. I don't know. Anyway, we did that.
Gained something from it.
And there is one common thread that goes through each and every single entrepreneur, each and every single leader, executive director, chief executive, chairman, non-executive directors of company. The one common thing that they all have is their ability to identify what really matters and to set aside noise, clutter, and distraction. And I think in a 21st century world in which information moves as fast as it does, in the misinformation pandemic in which we live, where you can so easily be distracted and you can so easily be taken off course by conjecture, supposition, new trends, new ideas, crackpot schemes, whatever it might be. It's very easy to be distracted from your core purpose and what it is that you are doing and how you're doing it. You don't want to be naive to changes in the world, but you also don't want to be you don't want to be distracted by them. So that one character trait that they have is that ability to suspend what doesn't matter and to focus on what does matter. The Israeli academic Noah Yuval Harari, who wrote *Sapiens*, and he's written other books as well, says true power means knowing what to ignore. And, as we go into a new dawn of politics in America, politics across Europe, leadership around the world in turmoil, the most successful leaders of the future are those who are going to be able to manage an ambiguity which is around us and is pervasive around us. And so I don't know if there is a recipe or a 15-point plan to doing this stuff. But it is the ability to manage ambiguity which is going to set apart people who make better decisions from those who are less good at it. Because often our decisions cannot be binary. Our decisions cannot have a single facet to them. We've got to realize that we're operating in an environment that is considerably complex and nuanced and really, really difficult to navigate. And the moment we think it's easy, or the moment we think we can do it just by firing off an idea and expecting people to implement our ideas and just do as they're told, I think we're going to run into trouble. And so decision-making is about managing ambiguity, understanding nuance, and understanding that not every piece of information that comes at you needs your attention or a reaction from you. And I think social media has largely driven the distraction economy, and we need to bring it in a little bit and figure out what to ignore, and we'll be better off.
Wow. since you've learned these processes, have you sat down and really thought, gee, this has really shaped me. These are some of my best decisions now that I've learned some of these things. Do you look back on some of those decisions, or could you say what are some of your best decisions that you've actually formally made because of this process, because of understanding this, having this conscious competence now, towards decision making?
I openly admit to being a work in progress. I openly admit to making catastrophically awful decisions where it gets to a point where your brain is about to explode, because no matter how many columns and how many bits of paper and how many notes you make in your phone and how many voice notes you leave yourself, and when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, write a note to yourself because you've had a nightmare or whatever it might be, we are, and I am so personally aware of this, driven by the emotion of decision making. And I am constantly working on the fact that I must not respond to, I don't know, an email, a call, an opportunity on how it makes me feel. It must be judged on the facts. And that ability to be mindful of focusing on the facts is a skill I'm working on. One of the finest executives I have ever met, with two friends, created what is the most valuable banking group in Africa. And it's a tough continent upon which to do business. And I recall sitting with him the one day, and I said to him, you built this business from scratch. There were three of you. One of them left, but stayed involved, and they brought another one in, so the fourth musketeer, if you like. They shared an office. They didn't have enough money between them in the 1980s for their own photocopier, so they would go and pay a couple of pennies upstairs to a company that did have a photocopier, and they photocopied on both sides, and they were very parsimonious. And these guys are dollar billionaires to this day. They've done all right. And I said to him, how have you done it? And he said, well, you never make a decision on your own. You always gather the very best minds that you pay a huge amount of money to into a room, the relevant ones. You throw the ideas around the table, you give them the problem, and those that bring the best facts and the least emotion to the argument win the day. And then you make sure that everybody around the table buys in to what you've decided upon. And you go out and implement it. I said, what if it's wrong? I said, that's not a problem. Then we've learned something. We've learned what doesn't work. We come back in again. We say, all right, that was a dumb idea. Whose idea was it? Why do you think it went wrong? How can we make it better? And you go and do it again. And in that process, not every decision you make is going to work. Not everything is going to be successful. In fact, if you've got a 1 in 2 hit rate, you're probably way above average. And it's a case of accepting that some things won't work, revisiting them. If you can find a better methodology, try again. If not, maybe it was a terrible idea. Bin it. Cut your losses. Don't get your ego involved, because the moment you're making decisions about what you feel rather than what is real, I think that's where you run into problems. And yeah, these are not unemotional people. These are people who, cry at weddings. These are people who do have real emotions, but they don't allow those emotions to cloud their judgment. And they are constantly testing, and testing.
Who's an interesting case study for this? I just watched a documentary on Jim McMahon. Is it Jim McMahon? Jim McMahon. He was the CEO, the founder of the World Wrestling Entertainment, multi-billion-dollar industry now, publicly traded. But he started it with very humble beginnings, and he'd had a lot of enemies, And this is not a guy to model, 100%. But a lot of his people that he ended up going into court with, there was lawsuits, or there were enemies or competitors. Ted Turner's WCW was a competitor. At the end of it, he collaborated with these people because it's like, this is just better for business. The total outcome is like, I could let my emotions get in the way, or whatever's best for the outcome. It doesn't matter, the result. And that's hard for some people. That doesn't encapsulate everything we're talking about today as far as decision making, but it's a big part of good decision making.
What makes great diplomats great diplomats? People who go into a room with people with whom they disagree fundamentally on a personal basis. Their ideologies are separate. They're in a room with people who may have committed mass murder. They're in a room with people who have, may have stolen money. Asbjørn Rucklu, for example, not a diplomat, but a police officer. I'm jumping around a bit, I apologize. But Asbjørn Rucklu is one of the smartest police officers I've ever spoken to. I haven't spoken to that many police officers, thank goodness, in my time, but those I have spoken to. And he was a police superintendent, and Norway had gone through a case where there'd been a false conviction on somebody who'd admitted to a crime because they'd been broken down by about 300 hours of interrogation, and they find, you know what, maybe I did do it. I wasn't even there on the day, but maybe I did it anyway. Yes, just make it stop. And Asbjørn was really badly personally affected by this and went and studied at Liverpool University under a professor of decision-making called Lawrence Allison. And Asbjørn went back into Norway, and they started reinventing the way they did police interrogations. 2011, a nasty little sod called Anders Behring Breivik exploded a bomb outside a government building in Oslo. 8 people were killed. He used that as a distraction then to go up to a place called Utoya and dressed as a police officer with firearms. And there was a Democratic Party Congress there, and he didn't like the leftist-leaning politics of these young people, and he opened fire on everyone he saw. And by the end of the day, there were 77 people dead, and he surrendered, and he admitted to committing the acts, and he said it was perfectly justified because he believed that Europe was going to the dogs, and there were other cells just like him all over Europe that would rise up, and you would never know where and when and how it would happen. So they knew they had their man. What they didn't know was what he knew about the potential of other cells. They didn't know whether he'd had help to build the bomb. They didn't know how he'd acquired his weapons. And instead of the table bashing, typical Hollywood police interrogation drama that you see played out on screens all the time, Asbjørn took me into the interrogation room where they spoke to him, and it looks like a 1980s doctor's surgery. 2 government-issued chairs, a little table, a little flower in the middle of the table, microphones. The interrogator has a screen upon which they can see notes that are being delivered to them from behind glass panels where you've got experts sitting. And I was stunned by what Asbjørn said in this moment, and I think this is where it comes to great decision-making, where you remove emotion from it, because the entire Scandinavian region, but Norway in particular, was torn apart. Norway, one of the most wealthy per capita countries in the world, one of the happiest countries in the world, one of the most astonishing places on earth. It suddenly had the unthinkable happen, and it was domestic tourism. It wasn't somebody who'd come in as an immigrant and had decided that they were going to impose a new ideology on the system. It was one of them. And he said we treated him with respect. It was not our job to judge him. It was our job to find out what he knew. I said, but how do you suspend judgment of somebody you know has done something terrible? He said, you have to do that. You have to remove your emotion from the interrogation process, because the moment you get emotional, as to your WWE example, the moment WWFE, anyway, the fighty guys. Anyway, yeah. The moment you allow emotion to influence the way in which you seek to garner information, you are going to make a mistake. You're going to allow your biases, your prejudices, your beliefs. You're going to seek to prove what you already think. So you're going to drive the interrogation in a particular direction. Confirm what I think, and you'll make my brain happy, and we can sign off on this thing. We can go out to the TV cameras. We can go out to the Prime Minister, and we can say to him, we've solved the problem. The case is solved. But you won't know everything you need to know. They took 9 months, hundreds of hours of dismantling each and every single argument that this guy, who believed his own story, but they dismantled him. And by the end of it, they were absolutely convinced that he was a lone wolf. He had no help. He had the capability. He knew where to get the components. He had the technical ability to build the bomb. He had acquired the firearms himself. He had done all of it alone. There was no further risk. And at that point, they were able to go, we're convinced, one guy, and this is why he carried it out. Conviction, off to jail you go. And it's only by removing emotion from any conversation that you can get to close to a plausible conversation. The moment we bring in, but I believe, or I think, rather than the fact state, I know, I have seen this before, we need to research this particular aspect. It changes the tone of the conversation completely, because it's no longer about me. It is about what the decision is about. It's no longer, who cares what I think? They care what you know. They care what you can extract from them. They care what you come to get, the solution. And also, by the way, and Brad Fried, Sir Brad Fried, His Eminence, Sir Brad Fried, is it lovely? By the way, he's just got a nice title for being the chairman of the Bank of England. But he talks about far better quality decisions are reached, and implementation of decisions is far more successful when the person who's leading the meeting has barely made a contribution and the team has come to their own conclusion, because then they own it. And once you own a decision, you go out and you do your damnedest to make it work. And you adjust and you flex and you do whatever is necessary to deliver on what you said you were going to do.
The internal dialogue that needs to happen, and that dynamic of that interaction is pretty interesting. Different subject as far as decision making, but I would think that how to manage your emotions through internal dialogue, when you're navigating through that is it's one hell of a dynamic.
It's so hard. It is so hard because we are wired from the earliest days to satisfy ourselves that we love being right, and we love to be proven correct. And so many of the social media algorithms have figured this out. Mm-hmm. And so when you've clicked on a particular juicy bit of gossip or a bit of information, it says, "Oh, you like that, do you?" Mm-hmm. "Yes, I do. I'm going to give you a bit more of that." Mm. One of my favorite tales, and I told the story as I gave a keynote to some cybersecurity experts last night, and there were two stockbrokers, both named Shapiro, unrelated, but Jack and David. Jack and David sat next to each other on the trading room floor in the olden days when there were trading room floors, and Jack received a phone call from somebody at Reuters, and they said, XYZ mining company, what's going on there? And Jack said, well, I don't really know, but it's entirely feasible that there's going to be a deal, that there could be a merger, and these we know that these guys are looking for a deal. It's possible that this could be happening. Okay, that's good. He puts down the phone, he turns to David. David goes, that's feasible. They carried on working, trading, doing their thing, open call out, so shouting share prices and stuff. But half an hour later, you remember those old, I suppose they were like ticker tapes, but the red LED screens.
I thought we were going back to like when it was the glass booth. You remember the glass from the 30s, that came out that ticker tape, but not that.
Not quite that old. Certainly a box with letters going across it and headlines and things. And the next thing, they look up and there is a headline that says, XYZ mining company, likely a takeover target, sources. And Jack turns to David. He says, see that? Yeah, I was right. It's true. Because that speculation had translated into a speculative news story with a headline that affirmed something that he thought was possible. And suddenly he had an affirmation that this is what was going on. And we work like that all the time. He felt good. He felt like a genius. And only years later did he realize, hold on a second. Oh, yes, that was me. But yeah, so we want to be proven right. We like to be proven right. We're comfortable with our, we get into our comfort zones, and it's, no judgment. But unless we constantly challenging ourselves and really looking to penetrate those beliefs a bit and say, am I making this decision because I like this person? we're making this decision because I know this person can do what they say they're going to do. And they've provided me with evidence of what they're going to do. Just this isn't Dragon's Den. We're not backing the person just because they're lovely. They are going to deliver. And it's a big call to make. And suspending yourself from that process is a superpower.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. The crossroads of that decision is to be cognitive of the dopamine hit for something that's going to do that for you, rather than the reality of, I was wrong. Now I need to take this path. It's going to ultimately be better for me. It's a better decision. And then we're constantly, hit those crossroads a lot, throughout the day. We're constantly seeking dopamine hits we grab our phones with I just took care of some work. Maybe I'll go on to Facebook or something, get that.
To reward myself with just a few little 2, 3 hour, 4 hours of scrolling, because
I went on there for my own business, but now wait, I'm just doing this for entertainment. All right. So let's button this up. Look, where are you at today with your career? Let's go back to you. I want to know what's going on with you in your career right now. You said you're writing another book. You can't talk about it, but let's talk about what's happening with you topically. Tell us about what's happening in your personal life, whatever you want to share. I'm a nosy American, so tell us about what's happening with you currently.
And I'm a conservative pom. No, a big family change, kids and schooling and stuff. And I got to a point at the end of 21 years on the radio going, what's next? And at some point, it's going to end. Do I end it on my terms, or do I end it at somebody else's terms? And I could have carried on doing, frankly, what I was doing for myself in perpetuity. I'm loving it every day. Turn up interesting people, lovely conversations. And it was not easy, but it was comfortable. I had a rhythm going, and realized that if I didn't cut it off when I cut it off and transition to something new, I might regret it in 5 or 10 years' time, when it might be too late to set off on my own and really focus on passion projects and things that I care about deeply. And when you're covering the daily news agenda for 240 days a year, you're constrained by that. And as comfortable as the job is and the salary is, and as wonderful as it is to have the regularity and the familiarity, it's good to be scared. And so with a lot of forward planning and a lot of thought and a couple of security blankets in place, you take the plunge and you go, it's time to back yourself on this. And so the Art of Deciding podcast has emerged out of that. The book, which is going to also open up new avenues in terms of speaking and contributing on global stages, is going to be valuable because it is the cutting edge of particular technologies, and an insatiable curiosity to just figure out how people think. Oh, my goodness me. And one of the most maddening and frustrating and wonderful and uplifting all at the same time things is there are 8 billion of us on this planet. Not a single one of us is the same as anybody else. And it's what makes it scary, dangerous, and wondrous all the time. Let me ask a quick question.
Sure.
World Bank publishes a thing called the World Uncertainty Index. And it's very, very volatile, as you would expect. You get to, the dot-com bubble bursting, and 9/11, there's a big spike up. And then you get to the Iraq war, and there's a big spike up. And you get to the global financial crisis, there's a big spike up. And you get to Greek debt crisis and the possible dismantling of the European Union in 2012, a big spike up. And it recovers again. And you get to Brexit, and then you get to COVID, and there's a huge spike up. And you get to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and you get to Gaza, and you get to the reappointment of Donald Trump, the re-election of Donald Trump as president. and you get these spikes because suddenly, what was certain is no longer certain, and we panic into it. And you look at the huge volatility in this graph, and you go, the one thing about volatility is it's really short-lived. It's long in the present, but in retrospect, it was actually just a spike. And decision-making into volatile times is a very, very dangerous thing to do, because invariably you're going to revert to your very worst fears and prejudices and biases and beliefs, and you are more likely than not to make a bad decision. From 1990 to the present day, that's when this index starts. what has the S&P 500 delivered in percentage terms from 1990 to the present? And
I'll take a guess on that one. I would say approximately between, let's say 11 and 12.5%.
Are you talking about compounded per annum? I'm talking about a total.
Total over time. So
and your supposition is right. By the way, I think it's there or thereabouts in terms of
NASDAQ 100. I think is about 13.5. It's about a point.
That was not the question. The question was the S&P 500 because I don't have the NASDAQ data in my mind. I only have the S&P 500.
NASDAQ 100 because it's a little bit better. It's like about 1.5% better. So anyway, it's still an index fund, but yeah.
No, but the S&P 500, just the index. Yeah. Just the index. If you had put $1 into the S&P 500, beginning of 1990, and you hadn't thought about it, and you looked at it today, that dollar is worth $1,508.
Yeah.
The compounding effect over 40 years, 30 years, many years, 30 odd years, of 10, on average, 10 or 11% a year, comes to that monumental number of over 1,500% return. If you'd reinvested the dividends over that time, you could probably double that 1,500%.
Right.
And I use that as a way to illustrate that if you panic in and panic out of issues, if you read Morgan Housel's book, Same as Ever, he says, don't look at what changes, look at what doesn't change. And what doesn't change is human ingenuity, problem solving, creating new technologies, creating new solutions. The 10 biggest companies in the S&P 500 today didn't exist, 10, 12, 15 years ago. Certainly they were not part of the index or part of anybody's dream in 1990. The world moves on, the world changes, the underlying world. And if you are making your decisions on a knee-jerk basis to every single bit of crisis and everything, you're going to be trading in and out of positions. You're going to be paying taxes you don't need to pay. You're going to be missing out on growth that you're going to miss out on over time. What really happens in the world is human progress continues. The noise levels continues. Information moves faster than everything else. We're overwhelmed and overburdened by all of this information. We go, it's all going to hell. But in reality, most people in most parts of the world for most of the last 200 years are better off than they were back then. There are big breaks in that logic, of course, big wars, terrible natural disasters, terrible things happen in the meantime. But as a whole, humanity progresses. And that, when you try and boil down decision-making into that sort of framework, you realize you need to step back. As the Jack Reacher creator, Lee Child tells me in the first episode, is sometimes you just need to take a step back and then another step back and try and get a whole picture rather than focus and panic. If you're a Jack Reacher fan, by the way, the Lee Child interview, The Art of Deciding podcast, is a thing of beauty. He is a reprobate, is Lee Child. He's about 70 years old. We spoke for about an hour. He chain smoked all the way through. I think he got through 7 or 8. I lost count. Big chain smoked all the way through, and he was just telling tales about Jack Reacher and his motivation and how it all started and why he, as a British author, moved to America and set Reacher in small town America. And, what he could get away with there where he couldn't get away with in big cities. And it was just a different kind of hero story.
Yeah.
And that decision-making process around creating Jack Reacher and putting elements of himself in Jack Reacher, the rage, because Reacher gets fired after the Cold War, it gets palmed off, the US military kicks him out, and so he's this lone guy going around the world. Lee Child himself is fired from a job in television because he's just mouthy and too expensive, and rather than go and get another job, he says, I'm going to write a bestseller. And he does.
I love Jack.
Yeah, wonderful tales. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tales.
Always an instant payoff. We all want to be Jack Reacher sometimes. So
I want arms like Jack Reacher. I think people might respect me more.
Sure. We want to be able to, I wish I had his height. Let's talk about, by the way, that last bit was outstanding. What a great, as you get to be an older fart like me,
you said us. You were about to say us, and I would have agreed. Yes.
I can't involve you in my idiosyncrasies, but I will say that you do find yourself finally a light bulb hits because when you're younger, you just don't think about these, and you hear about it since you're probably in your late teens, but you just don't follow it. But I find myself visiting an investment calculator more often than I would care to admit, and going through the scenarios.
And the most dangerous thing about that is sitting there and going, the three widows of regret: could have, should have, and would have, and going, there's no more upside. The S&P 500 has hit 56 new highs so far this year. Oh, the crash is coming. It's inevitable. Inflation is beginning to tick up. The Fed's going to have to raise rates. The politics is going to cloud everything. Whether Donald Trump is good for restructuring America or not, I don't know. It's too late. And that is often the biggest mistake you can make, is
terrible decision.
being overwhelmed by the noise.
I hate the too late phrase. That it's not true, but we all do. We'll look at. I do you the yin and the yang. Okay, because you do need to project out, right? And then you do your projection, and then you do a little bit of revisitation. Sometimes it's an unhealthy revisit. Say, what if this happened? I suggest not going there. Just kind of think about, be Zen-like and Taoism and today and moving forward and planning.
Exactly.
And that segues nicely into what we're going to ask right now. And that is, what's your plan for tomorrow? What's your big picture? We kind of skated on that a little bit, but we want to know what somebody excels at decision-making. What's your long-term play for yourself?
I like talking, I'm afraid. My son, aged 5, came home from school the one day desperately unhappy, and was, "What's wrong?" He said, "Why can't you have a real job?" I said, what do you mean? He says, "Ben's dad has got a real job, and he has stickies," and stickies were a dreadful little piece of rubber landfill that a retail group was giving out with your shopping purchases, and kids just loved these awful things. They were funny little monsters and things. His dad has got stickies, and all you do is blah, blah, blah. And I remind him now at age 16, 90 kilograms, 190 pounds, 6'3" of muscle and sinew. And I remind him of those days. And what do I want to do? What is my decision? My decision is to help people better understand themselves, how to better understand the world in which they live, to navigate the uncertainties of the world in which they live, learn to accept that ambiguity is part and parcel of who we are and what we need to contend with, focus in on what they do, using real world examples, doing that across podcasts, doing that on stages, doing that in books, but at the same time, marveling at human ingenuity and human progress and the ability of humanity to solve problems. And so often we get caught up in the scariest things in the world right now, whether it be remilitarization, wherever you stand on global warming, changing climates and weather patterns are terrifying, global debts. I think the IMF is estimating that global government debt this year goes to $100 trillion for the very first time, and the US has got more than a third of that, and how that unwinds at some point in the future. And you can easily get yourself into a very big, tumultuous mess. And understanding that you've got absolutely no control over that. And so you have to manage your way through that uncertainty and often dismiss the loudest noises, the scariest noises, in favor of plotting, rather than trying to predict the future, planning for multiple possible scenarios into the future, so that should something go badly wrong, you're able to survive it financially, you're able to survive it psychologically, emotionally, whatever it might be. Don't take too many big bets. And if you're taking big bets, make sure you've got a balance sheet to support them. And, and the biggest thing, I suppose, is don't regret what has gone wrong in the past, just do better in the future and truly interrogate your decision-making processes, know yourself well, and allow others to give you some input from time to time. It can be therapeutic.
Yeah, these are what a great. I went over today a lot of great value here, and helping us navigate through this is I really got a lot out of this today. There's so much, I'm actually, when I find I have a good conversation, maybe you're the same, sometimes I'm confused because I still want to talk more, but I'm still also confused afterwards. When you're confused, it means that you're really learning something. It means your brain is concentrating on so many things.
And forgive me for not being linear, but it's you ask questions and I find tangents and tails and things, and hopefully it comes together in some sort of patchwork quilt that makes sense. And it's a host of ideas that possibly could be better ordered, but that's not where my brain works.
No, I think you encapsulate it perfectly. I think my thing is that I just don't want to stop. This is so valuable. This is really what do we, the art form of studying decision making, why we do what we do, and consciousness. I mean, what else is there? This is what we're all trying to figure out. What substantiates our existence.
What is the thing we have in common? I mean, we eat and breathe and sleep, but we all make decisions all the time, and we know which ones have worked out. We know how often do we truly interrogate the big decisions? Where do we send our kids to school? Why do we live where we live? Are we making the best decisions for them? Are we being great ancestors? How will future generations judge us based on the calls we made? And yeah, it can do your head in. But anyway, you said at the beginning we're going to talk for half an hour, and it's been an hour. Look at you, Michael.
I know.
You're not a man of your word.
Half of it was for everybody else. Half of it was for me, a little selfishness, because now I want to be able to absorb this. I get a lot out of everybody I talk to. And you know what? A lot of people, my daughter will say this thing. I've already heard all the personal development stuff, my dad, I want something new. I'm like, actually, you just heard something that's the same, but maybe a variation of what you heard. And it's very valuable because it's down in your nervous system again, and let's go out and try to apply it, So after you guys heard this, if you listen to the whole thing, try to really apply what you heard today, because this is really, when you really, after all the interviews that, Bruce has done and all the interviews I've done, I can tell you right now, this is probably the apex of what is the most important decision-making, why people do what they do, your consciousness level, getting that data. Of course, the physical knowledge, taking action on it. If I could button that up, this has been extremely valuable. I really enjoyed it. I don't go over unless I really think that it's super important. So, Bruce Whitfield, please tell everybody how they can find out more about you, about your podcast, everything else you do.
Well, as you've given me a platform to do this, yes, my name is Bruce Whitfield, Whitfield, and it's brucewhitfield.com. You can find the Art of Deciding podcast on all the good podcast platforms. LinkedIn, I'm on social media everywhere. There are a few fake accounts, which I take as very flattering. But yes, I tend to spend most of my time sort of posting thoughts and ideas on LinkedIn. And yeah, as a public speaker, it's a privilege to go on stages all over the world and bend people's brains a bit. And I've got some wonderful tools and puzzles and tricks and things which, even when you have told an audience to be aware of what they think and how they respond, it's so beautiful that when you then test them immediately, they all go immediately back to type. And it's just such a wonderful, powerful exposition of how deeply wired we are to our beliefs and our biases, and how much work it takes truly to break those. And I'm a work in progress. I think we're all works in progress.
So valuable, so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Michael, I look forward to seeing the final product. Tag me. I'd love to share. Thank you so much.
Will do.
Thanks for joining us. Gear up for your next adventure and head over to bolotour.com to check out the amazing Bolo Pack and their other innovative outdoor gear. Catch you next time.